joining. Fantastic. Let's get underway. So, yeah, thank you for those of you who've come along to the second in our Future Earth Coasts Just Transitions series. And I suspect some of you will be tuning into the recording later, in which case, welcome retrospectively, and thank you to those of you that have come in real time as well. So I'm Leslie Maben, and as with the first session, I am hosting the session this evening, evening in the UK time. So the theme of this session is on coastal protection, and we're very happy to have two contributors tonight who are going to be talking through different aspects of coastal protection and what that means for a just transition. And so how things are going to run tonight is we'll have two contributions from our two experts, and we'll broaden out then into a roundtable discussion where I've got some questions prepared to open up a conversation with our presenters, and anybody who's listening who would like to contribute questions as well is extremely welcome to. So very happy tonight to have joining us from Australia, Charles Lemkert, and also then joining us from Colombia, Camilo Botero. So yeah, thank you both, Charles and Camilo. I'll let you introduce yourselves when it comes to each of your respective presentations. But I think we can just at this point we can probably just get underway. I think, Charles, you're going to start with a broader picture before Camilo gives us something more empirical. So Charles, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leslie, and welcome to everybody for this presentation and the discussion which we'll have afterwards. And I just want to say thank you to FEC and all those involved for arranging this presentation, the people listening for their interest in it. Yes, my name's Charles Lemkert. I'm a professor in engineering at Southern Cross University in Queensland, Australia. That's basically right on the east coast. Where the weather I was going to say is fantastic today. It's actually pelting rain, but it's a very nice place to live. And that picture you see is actually taken of the Gold Coast on the right-hand side. And it is an example when you have a high density coastline, you have to have a certain protection mechanism for it. This presentation is actually about coastal nature-based solutions, equitable multi-hazard risk reduction. In my environment where I live, nature-based solutions aren't really a possibility. We do rely on hard engineering structures to defend the coastline. However, not very far from where I live, other communities absolutely need nature-based solutions as a mechanism to move forward. And we'll talk a bit about what they are and how they would work. So a case for nature-based solutions, as I said, I'm on the Gold Coast. This picture on the right-hand side was actually taken last year. We had a cyclone / hurricane / typhoon. We call them cyclones in Australia. Came down the coast and decided to have fun and basically pummeled the coastline. Now, because this area is highly populated, very tourist orientated, we had to make sure our coast was defended. So you've got these people, that's about a 5-meter drop from where these people are standing down to the sand. And this is a protected environment. There's great engineering structures just under the sand, what we call an A-line. It defends what's behind us. With the climate change we're encountering nowadays, I think we'll probably see more and more cases like this on the beach face. And what we have to do in this particular zone is actually we have to use nature to fix it. So we have to bring in sand, let the sand readjust and create our dunes and beaches again once the storms are past, which doesn't last too long, but it was certainly amusing for this particular region. Because when you live in high density areas, protection is paramount. And one of the issues with nature-based solutions, which we'll talk about, is uncertainty. In the engineering sense, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. So what do we mean by nature-based solutions? Well, typically that's come to mean a system which uses nature to help protect the coastline. And it can be things, and the one you often hear mentioned is mangrove forests, where they grow on the shoreline. They will, as the waves approach them, the waves propagate through the mangroves. That propagation process takes energy. The mangrove roots themselves can absorb that energy and the turbulence the waves generate. So as the waves progress through, the wave energy gets smaller, and the waves, when they come through the mangroves, if they ever get through them, are significantly reduced. You have things like shore stabilization, where you can grow plants down to the shoreline if you have the right environment to do that. You have coral reefs. A lot of Australia, north of where I live, has the Great Barrier Reef system. That Great Barrier Reef system absolutely defends the coastline from major ocean waves. You have smaller reef systems around the world which help protect coastlines. Coral atolls, basically a reef system, they get protected by the outer reef on inwards. But these are all nature-based solutions, same like oyster reefs, where you can actually generate real ones or artificial ones in front of a natural protect an environment you want to protect. And you again these reduce waves because waves break. Large waves will break, small waves will go through, but it's a large wave you want to stop hitting the shorelines that causes the most erosion. You have sediment stabilization. Typically, you grow seagrasses on the bed. So there's a lot of talk about when seagrass populations reduce, sedimentation increases, but also wave propagation increases. So what people are moving more towards is actually what they call hybrid solutions. Is where you try and combine these different methods. And from an engineering perspective, the hybrid solution is probably a preferred mechanism because you have the certainty of rock structures. You also have but you also have uncertainty in the vegetation. Engineers love certainty. We work on certainty, we work on risk reduction. There's a lot of studies done on seawalls, breakwaters, groin structures, all these sort of rock concrete things people build around the world to protect coastlines. It's quite well understood. Not perfect, but it's getting there. It's getting better. So when we want to use nature-based solutions on top of that to help the environment, help biodiversity, help reduce costs in a lot of ways, because it does cost to build these hard structure systems, we don't quite understand all the mechanisms behind how the waste propagate through them, how the biology responds, and the uncertainty you have with water quality changes, climate change. So there's a bit of uncertainty comes into it when you look in these nature-based solutions. So with nature-based solutions, as you saw, when you look at, we could have a footpath on the Gold Coast right up to the beach, even if it erodes. If you want nature-based solutions where you have mangroves, seagrasses, oyster reefs, coral reefs in front, you need space. So if you have a space like in this picture here, you can obviously develop nature-based solutions, but you have space to do it. So it does have a requirement often that you need some sort of fallback distance for that. Great in the new system, not so great in the old system. So who benefits from nature-based solutions? Well, the governance does shape it. How you instill the ability to install the nature-based solution coastal protection system does depend on your governance. Someone has to give the approval, someone has to do the design, and someone's got to pay for it. How those three come together, Camilla will talk about two good examples as well. It's not a simple process, and it does take a lot of negotiation, discussion, thought, consideration, finance at all different levels. We want nature-based solutions to be successful. We need all these things to be in alignment. We need distributional equity, where we look at how we're going to redistribute the risk around things. Because if we are going to install a nature-based solution, it probably will take away some land that people own. So we have to consider that in our decision-making system and how we can benefit from that. There's procedural equity. How is this actually going to occur? What the mechanisms to make it happen? Someone's got to pay for it. It doesn't come for nothing. And we've also got to think of recognitional equity. Let's look at the Indigenous communities, understand the values of the land, understand what they've learned from the land over the millennia, and make all these things come together. So to have good governance, you need secure and just tenure. You need to be fair and equitable. You have strong local institutions. It's very hard to get a nature-based system coming in operation if no one's going to look after it. So you've got to get strong local engagement. You also need multi-level governance. It's fine for the locals to say, we'd like to do this. If it doesn't fit within the next levels up through the environments, it's not going to work. It won't get off the ground. You won't get the support. And even if you do build it, who's going to look after it? You need that very strong overall governance to look after it. So you need capacity building at all levels. You need to educate the locals about nature-based solutions. If you just go and plant it, somebody might think, great firewood, we can use that for other purposes. We can take the rocks away and build retaining walls elsewhere. So you need everybody to have buy-in and wanting to be involved. And that gives you the long-term co-production. Once you've got one system going, communities learn from each other, and you build up this long-term engagement. And that's working quite well in various parts of the South Pacific. So from an engineering point of view, this picture on the right is actually in Vanuatu, and it's a tourist place as well. Often you'll see hard engineering structures in tourist places, but they want to maximize the land. And there's absolutely no beach around here, but it's not meant to be. There's beach further around. So you need planned integration. You've got to think, what areas do we want to build up? What areas do we want to protect? How do we want to protect them? There is a standards gap I mentioned before. If you're planning a protection system and you want it to work to some extent, you need to understand all the variables. If there's a research gap that's really missing, it is the understanding of the biological interactions with the engineering structures. That is a big gap in knowledge that we just don't have. It's uncertainty about how will the plants respond, how the seagrasses respond, oysters respond, how do all these respond and maintain themselves, and how do they move forward? From that, you get the decision tools. You can look at the carbon accounting gap and how these projects actually complete. There's a whole lot of things to think as we step forward in this space. So we've got to think this is the engineer talking. So things that limit NBS effectiveness from an engineering point of view is the biophysical performance. Engineers require certainty. We need that certainty to understand how the biophysics will interact with these structures. Let's make them more biologically orientated, but we have to consider climate change. We've got to think what's going to happen if the sea level rises 1 centimetre, 2 centimetres, 5 inches. What's going to happen? How does that affect the biology? Mangroves will get flooded. Can they respond quick enough? So in the development stage, you'd like to understand this. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do this. Absolutely, we should. It's just to make it more longer term and more uptake at the higher up levels, we need that sort of certainty. So from the biophysical performance, we can get the government's performance. They can understand what's going on. So we need to educate the government, we need to educate the locals and anybody interested in doing this. And then from that, we also need financial stability. Once we can show these systems work and they can be maintained, we can defend our coastline better. We can even benefit from it because once you've got a nice biophysical system set up, you have increased fisheries and all increased water quality, increased stability on the coastline, and everyone benefits from it. It's just convincing people to do this. And Kimilo's got a great example we'll talk about later on. So just finishing up, on the left is what we'd like to see, maybe not the garbage bin necessarily, and on the right is what we often encounter because we just don't have the knowledge and the systems. And if developments are on the waterfront like that on the right, we don't have the space. So nature-based solutions are great. Right space, right time, right place is what is necessary. And if we do it together, we can absolutely move forward. So that's where I'll leave it. And I'm going to hand over to Camillo. His presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Charles, for a great high-level overview there. As you just said, we're now going to pass over to Camilo. Just for those of you, I see a few people have come in late as the discussion was underway. And so just to say, after we've had the two presentations, we will have a discussion. So if you have any questions for either Charles or Camilo, then please do put them in the chat and we will come to them when we get to the roundtable discussion. So thank you again. Thank you again, Charles. And over to you, Camilo.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and thank you, Charles, for your presentation. I think it's great, that we are acting as a team because this is important. You give the basis. So I will show to everyone. Just give me a second. I just want to hide the menu, here, that. Okay, there. Perfect. So tonight, good evening for everyone. And now I'm in Canada. So for me is the night, and my name is Camilo Botero. I'm an environmental engineer with a master in coastal engineering, but a PhD in coastal geography. So I was, for 30 years, I have been trying to be as more indisciplinary as I can. So this is a result for today. I'm working at Dalhousie University in Canada, in Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada, as a researcher in a project related with climate change, transforming climate action. But at the same time, I'm a professor in Colombia in the Sergio Arboleda University in the School of Law, in which I'm teaching coastal legislation and risk governance. So I will talk a bit about these topics that are related with how can we define a just transition in coastal protection. So the first thing that we need to think is that this is a systemic approach. So we need to think as a system, not just with fragmented parts. We need to take in account the human interest, but also the economic interest, social and cultural interest, and of course, natural and ecological interest. So the goal is to balance all four elements. It's not that one is the most important and the other just need to work related with this most important. Not is that all of these different elements are the same importance, but how to do that? I'm really glad that Charles was talking about governance because this is a big part. Coastal protection start with coastal legislation. Uh, I am as an engineer, I know that when we are designing a hard structures, or any kind of protection structure, we need to have, we have numbers, we have some simulations, we have models, etc. But what is really important is that we have a legal base for doing that. I am showing here three quick examples because this is recording, and also if you want to contact me at the end will be my contact information. But these are three publications that I just want to show you. In 2022, we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first Coastal Zone Management Act in the world that was in the US. This was a big moment for my career in the sense that I had the opportunity to talk with the Congress in Colombia to say, hey, senators, look at that. In the US, they had a Coastal Zone Management Act 50 years ago, and we still don't have any. And I just published the book that you can see in the middle, that this is a policy paper that was given to all the congressmen in their hands. But unfortunately, we still don't have a coastal zone management act or any kind of coastal legislation. But at the same time, I was studying in Turkey. I had a project in Turkey that we compare Colombia and Turkey because in Turkey they had the Coastal Management Act that is not, perfect, but it's a lot better than what we have in Colombia. And why that is important? I will show you another example here, just in Nova Scotia, where I am just now. Uh, it- in the year 2019 was approved the bill number 106, that is the Coastal Protection Act. And I was studying this act because this is really, really a wonderful piece of legislation that everyone should study, really. It's very, very well written. It have a definition of coastal zone. It has very interesting principles that maybe for when we are working in the academia or we are in the coastal engineering, most of these principles sounds like obvious, but that we have these principles in a legislation, this is quite innovative. Say that the coasts are dynamic and naturally migrate landwards and seaward. This is logic for most of us, but that to be in a legislation, this is very, very powerful. And other principles, I just want to attract your attention to this Coastal Protection Act in Nova Scotia, because it has, for example, the coastal protection zone. The idea is that here the plan was, I'm talking in past tense, you will discover later, but the plan was that all around the province, this is a more than 11,000 kilometers of coast in this province. And the idea was to have a coastal protection zone in which won't be allowed to build. And if you build over, because it's private land, here it's possible that you are the owner of the waterfront. No action liable for any loss or damage suffered if you build over this coastal protection zone. So no way to say to the government or to the insurance that, okay, you need to pay me because my cottage now destroyed by a hurricane or a storm. No, because you built in the wrong place. And it has also construction standards. It defines designating professions that could make the study to give you the permission. So it's a very nice piece of legislation. But the new government is not new now. But when it changed the government here, the current government, decided to archive this act. So now it's not in place. But let's go with our two examples for today. So we will moving from Turkey, the US, Canada. Let's go to the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean, for those that are not familiar with our geography here in the Americas, the Caribbean is just here in the middle, the heart of the continent. And we have the biggest island in the Caribbean, it is Cuba. And we have at South Colombia, that is just the door between Central America and South America. So we have two examples, two case studies I want to show you about coastal protection and the important legislation and governance. One is Varadero Beach, that this beach in Cuba had been for, I think, decades, the most important beach in Cuba. For many, many years, it was responsible for 60% of the income from tourism. So it was 22 kilometers of beach. And the other example is in the north part of Colombia, in Santa Marta, in a city where I was living for many years, and is the university in which I'm working now. So this is another totally different example. So let's go with the first case study, Varadero Beach in Cuba. The historical context is that it was an urban area, and Varadero is at 22 kilometers sand speed, but it's quite wide. I think it's around 3 kilometers wide and 22 kilometers long. So it was a small settlement that it was called Varadero, the Varadero town. And at the beginning, it was totally, cover all the coast, many houses that you can see here in the picture that was built over the dunes many, many, many years ago. But in 2000, the year 2000, in Cuba, they approved their coastal management law, and they start a process to try to recover these very important coastal assets, especially dunes, and try to recover dunes. So in the 2000s, they start an intervention. There were more than 150 houses or construction over dunes. And the government start negotiating one by one with each of the different owners. There were hotels, there were private owners, with houses. They were negotiating one by one to relocate them. And some of these houses, were very old houses, so a lot of inheritance there. So they need to negotiate with three, four, six people at the same time. But at the end, they managed to relocate most of the people there. And this was the strategy, was that to have a soft protection via renaturalization. So the plan there in Varadero, especially in the Varadero town, in the historical Varadero, was that they want to be prepared for hurricanes like Maria. It was a hurricane that really, really affected Varadero. But because they have these dunes, yeah, now this is another pictures. This is a new dune. This dune was not there 20 years ago. And now it's a dune that is higher than 10 meters. And this dune was totally recovered from scratch after demolish the houses and the construction that were negotiated, and relocated with the owners and rebuild the dune. So now you can be in a beach that looks very natural, but you have the town very, very, the town is just passing the dune is the street. So who benefits? Was the collective population. Everyone benefits with this solution. The primary stakeholders was the tourism sector, but as a public good, is that it's not just for tourists. In Cuba, you can access every beach. The beach is public, so anyone can access beach, and there is in the law that a certain space, a certain longitude, you have to have an access to the beach. Who lose? Okay, the short-term development projects, but there is a very nice example. The Spanish hotel chain Melia, maybe you know it. Melia, they had a hotel, not in this part, but in the other part of Varadero, a more than 1,000 room hotel. And because of the law, and also because the building was quite old, they decided to demolish the building, the whole hotel, and move it 200 meters back, rebuild a more modern building, and reconstruct, regenerate the dune. So now when you go to the International Hotel de Melia Varadero, you will be in the swimming pool and you just cross the dune and you will be on the beach, but you cannot see the buildings from the beach, even they are very close. So this is an approach that is collective and mutually beneficial. It's a model of shared stewardship at the end. Let's go to the other side, the other example. In Colombia, in the case study, is the Salguero Beach. This is my picture, in 2009. In 2009, in this beach was only three tall buildings, none more than 6 floors high, 6 floors tall. However, in less than 10 years, it was urbanized totally. The beach was totally urbanized. So what happened that it started erosion, and because it started erosion, because they were building very tall buildings very close to the beach over the dunes, some private owners, some of these buildings, they build their own groins just because they said, okay, we have erosion, and some coastal engineer suggests to them, why not you have your own growing? So they build this structure and accelerate the erosion. So what's happening nowadays, as you can see here in this picture, now you can see the swimming pool that is just over the sea directly. But it was not like that. The beach was a lot wider. But because all these buildings always, over, over these dunes, the erosion increased and increased and increased. So nowadays it's a huge erosion problem. What was the primary stakeholders? Retail investor and wealthy residents, because these apartments are not cheap apartments. They are not for the people in the community. There are second residents. So it was a process of real estate, and what was neglected, general public interest and beach access, the ecological health of the beach itself, and local communities, with no political leverage. So this is a clear example of entirely top-down and exclusionary process that instead of conserve the beach, now we need to protect. So nowadays we have there a lot of groins built there in this beach, a lot of public money paying for this disaster that was created by the real estate investors. So the approach was totally individualistic and privative, the antithesis of just transition. So some concluding remarks. What is the path forward? The idea is that we can learn something and advance to the future. Hard engineering, most of the times, not always, but most of the times, is privatize gains and socialize risk, unfortunately. But nature-based solutions is a collective resilience because it goes with nature in the times of nature, and we give room, as Charlie just said, we give room to nature to it's not to recover the land, it's just to move it because nature is alive. So sometimes the water will be closer, sometimes will be farther. And community members and investors often demand for hard structures. It happens in Colombia a lot. But it is mainly, at least in my opinion, due to low information and education on coastal dynamics. Imagine that we have citizen science. This is something that I'm just doing here in Canada, in Nova Scotia. Imagine that citizen science could be a transformational way. So the people, if they're collecting data for themselves on the coast, they will understand better how nature works. So some strategic action needed. Of course, sound replacement and doing restoration programs when we have a problem. Infrastructural relocation where it's feasible, not always is feasible, and halting urbanization in high speculation coastal zones. And about this high speculation and halting urbanization in this beach, in Varadero Beach, sorry, in Salguero Beach, it was in 2000, in 2023, was a judge that is decide that won't be possible, just health urbanization, say that it's not possible to build more in this beach until this erosion situation is solved. So this again, we go back to the legislation. So we need to prioritize natural, social, cultural values. That is great. But we need to legislate accordingly. Because if we are saying that we want to prioritize natural, social, and cultural values, but our legislation is just promoting the economy, the economic perspective, it will be very difficult that we can do it. And just to finalize and to give some hope, my perspective and what I want to share with all of you is that the management proposal is to act preventive so that we don't need to protect because we already conserve. One example is a tool, the Seascape certification. This is a certification scheme only for very, very natural beaches. The objective is to conserve these very few natural beaches remaining because we are too focused on those beaches and those coastal sectors that we already ruined. So we are trying to restore, we're trying to protect. But what happened with these natural beaches that we already have? And there are so many. I like to say that beaches are ecosystem in extinction. So if we don't act quick, we will lose all beaches, and the next generation they will know they don't know how a natural beach was. So this Seascape certification, I just invite everyone, to check in Seascape Global about this beach certification. And just to end, this is a song that you can go. Carlos Vives, he's one of the most famous Colombian singers of folk music. And he just launched this year a song that is called, My Dedication, I dedicate to you. And it's totally recorded, the video in a beach in Santa Marta, the last natural beach in Santa Marta City. And now is a plan to develop this beach. So most probably this will be the last time that we will see this beach natural as we can see in this video. So maybe we need to act more preventive. So thank you for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Camilo, for your contribution. I'm certainly going to check out the check out that music video. Maybe not right now. I maybe won't do any music or any singing, but I'm absolutely going to check that out when we finish the session. So what we have now is we've got a round table discussion. I've got some questions prepared for both Camilo and Charles, but anybody who's joining the call today, if you would like to ask any questions of our two participants, then please do raise your hand or put it in the chat. And I can see we've already got a question from Mofizor, who's one of our future Earth Coast Fellows. In fact, I'll just pass over to you to ask the first question. And when you ask your question, if you can just introduce yourself and say who you are and where you're calling in from today. So over to you, Mofizor.
Thank you. It's 2:00 at night in Berlin. I'm Bangladeshi actually. I work in the coast of Bangladesh. So two fascinating talk. I'm not asking a question, but raising two important points. One is the institutional arrangement, and number two is the dominant knowledge paradigm. So last year I organized a workshop with the people who work somehow in Bangladesh from all over the world, experts, and I see people are divided into two major groups: is nature-based solution versus engineers, and synergy is very difficult. And my experience from Bangladesh is a lot of the funding and the institutional arrangement we have is basically in favor of hardcore structure, because that's they're good at, and that's like, so a lot of firm been developed, a lot of engineering companies been developed historically, like all the people who are working on it, and it's for them it's very hard to accept these nature-based solution institutions. So there are not many institutions who are actually advocating for that. So it's mainly academicians. And the second thing is the knowledge paradigm. So you see, historically, Bangladeshi engineers are mostly educated either in Netherlands, is 70-80%, and rest is from UK, few from Australia probably. But the whole coastal protection department is educated from Netherlands, and they have kind of obsession of structures. So they want to build a lot of structures, and it has some sort of appetite for that. So my understanding in the academic discussion in Bangladesh, so nature-based solution is good, but it's kind of a romantic idea rather than something very applicable and some sort of useful. And the concept Charles mentioned about uncertainty, and engineers love certainty, and that's exactly the same discussion there. So nature-based solution probably a false hope. So it's bring a lot of co-benefit. It has a lot of emotional, lot of cultural, lot of social values. But when it comes to certainty, people are in absolutely in favor of structural solution. So combining these two and come to a hybrid model, it seems like a big challenge, and it needs a big knowledge paradigm shift. Thank you. I'll stop here.
That is a terrific contribution. Thank you so much for that. It's far better than any of the questions that I had prepared. I'll give Charles and Camilo just a moment to consider the response to that, because I was just going to say I wholeheartedly agree with what you were saying there, particularly around the sort of dominant knowledge paradigms. And it matches up very much to things that I've heard with some of the field work that I've been doing recently in Indonesia, where you have a similar thing with engineers being trained in the Netherlands again, and also in the past in a river context in Japan, where you learn concrete, for want of a better word, and it does make it hard for nature-based approaches or hybrid approaches to get any traction. I'll come to you first, Charles, just to ask. I mean, so Moffizer has raised a lot of really interesting points there about institutions and how knowledge is structured and how things are funded. Is there anything you kind of have to say to that, particularly regarding what you've said about nature-based solutions in a more conceptual sense?
Yes, I'll got to defend my Dutch background here too. Yeah, what I mentioned is probably the case. A lot of places that need defending are typically what you might call high value. So someone comes along and says, like I'm on the Gold Coast, they say, look, we know tourism is important. We need a beach. We have to defend the buildings we've allowed to be built too close to the beach. Very stupid mistake done by governments. So don't quote me on that necessarily. Decisions made in the past, we have to live with. So when we do build close to the coastline, even port facilities, they do require very determined structures to respond to it. So that's why that occurs. And yes, you do need you have the concrete, you have the rocks, because people basically know how they're going to respond. That's the certainty in the measurements. What you see happening more and more nowadays is governments are now saying in a sense, they're not so risky areas. They are looking at nature-based solutions. We have in Australia A lot of the river systems, instead of this just concrete channel, they're saying, can we do nature-based solutions in these channels? Can we populate them with plants to make them nicer, more amenities, and improve the visual aspects, but also the ecological aspects, and then the community aspects? So it is coming in, but it will take time, and there are limits in the areas. If you live in a very high energy coastline and you're trying to protect a beach in Sydney from houses falling down, you don't have a lot of choice. You do have choices in less energetic environments. So nature-based solutions absolutely have their place in certain areas. So it's a matter of educating people, getting governments on side, having the information learnt by all parties, the governance structures around it. So it is a process. And if you keep employing, sorry, careful I say, Delft graduates, yes, they're trained to do the high risk, high cost environments, and that's their job, and they do it very well. If you want people to start to say, let's defend a small community in Samoa, you don't necessarily want the Delft engineer to do that. You want someone who wants to embrace the less risky environment. Actually, it's more also, I guess, for the engineer point, it's probably low value environment. And also, if you even want to build a structure in some of these environments, it's so costly, it's prohibitive. So you do need a different approach to do it. So there is no simple answer, except it does take time, it does take education, and it takes a willingness from the public to accept change, for the politicians to accept change. Politicians get voted in by people. If the people want to see change, they can instigate change to a certain extent. So the people have to be educated, and that's where we really do need this outreach to occur and make those changes occur. That's sort of my general comment. So Camillo.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that, as I mentioned, I'm a coastal engineer, but first I was environmental engineer. So I think it make a change. When you are a civil engineer and study a master in coastal engineering, you are thinking about structures. But when you are an environmental engineer and you study a coastal engineering, you are thinking about the system. And I think this is the big difference. But at the same time, I think it's something that is important. It's about timing. When I think this mindset that we have as an engineers is that, trying to be as very, very simplistic is that we have a problem. So we, as an engineers, we need to have a solution. And as cheapest, as fastest, as simplest as is possible. But of course, this is quite difficult, especially when we have an uncertain situation. It's quite easy to build a house when you are, a totally flat area with not any, no wind, no disturb. This is quite easy, but if you go to the real world, and nature is just about uncertainty. I just was, nowadays that we have this boom with AI, that AI is something that is probabilistic, it's not deterministic. Just try, ask the same question to this language model. If you ask the same question 10 times, you will receive 10 different responses because this is not deterministic, this is probabilistic. So this is what happening with the nature, with the coastal ecosystems. It's not that you have a design for example, recover the dunes. You cannot take the same say the same structure, the same project in Varadero, and just bring to Bangladesh and just build exactly the same because it won't work. It's different place. So this is one thing. That the other thing is that it needs time, but in nowadays with our socioeconomic and political model, we want to have everything now. So is that we don't have 10 years for waiting to do and to recover by itself. So we will be just hiring a truck full of sand to just, replace. But what happened with nature is that nature is in an equilibrium. It's a balance. So this is why we need to give room. So what I will say about this, because one of my best friends, he studied in the Netherlands, so I quite know about the case. And I had a very good friend, from the Netherlands. And I understand that they are doing very nice things for their environment. But when we just translate one experience, whatever it's the place, it's not because it's the Netherlands, could be any place. But I think what is important now is that we start understanding our own environment. We are educating, forming our own engineers more with that ecosystem perspective than an structural perspective, and just learn about quantum physics. You know, it's uncertainty. This is the world. We cannot be deterministic. So, and of course, just to finish, the ideas, I think it's so important. Maybe because today in the afternoon I was in a panel about the topic, but legislation is so important because we were also talking here about politics, and these decision makers, when they are for a very short periods, the only way that we can think in the long term is if we have a legislation that help us to think in the long term. So at the end, the legislation is this bottom up and top down approach together.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you both very much for your very thoughtful responses to a very good question that's eaten up quite a bit of our discussion time. But it was a fantastic question. So thank you again, Mofizur. Yeah, as I say, anybody else, if you have other questions, please do put them in the chat or raise your hand. While to keep things moving forward, there's a question that I'll ask as well, which is maybe a more challenging question, and that is that are there limits to what can be protected? And if so, how best to have difficult conversations early about those who might be most affected by what is not protected? Again, Charles, I'll just throw this one to you in the first instance.
Thank you. Very difficult discussion, actually. I'm just thinking of a case in New South Wales in Australia, where it's very similar to places in England as well that I know of, where you have the coastlines retreating, and you know that the people's properties are going to fall into the ocean. The physics says it's going to happen, and geology supports it when you see the homes falling in. How do you tell the homeowner you're going to lose your home? Well, it does happen. You've got to tell them, and the evidence is there. It's probably best to educate people. Say, this is what's happening. Um, it's a tricky one because people don't want to know they're going to lose their home or their farm or their livelihood. But unfortunately, there are times you just cannot stop it. You can make the decision to slow it down if you want to spend millions of dollars doing it. There was a lovely case in the UK where this castle was about to fall in the ocean. This was about 50 years ago, probably could be 50, 60 years ago. They decided to concrete the whole side of the cliff face to protect this little castle because they thought it was important. So if you want to defend it, someone has got to make the decision why and is it worth it. So there's a financial consideration. There's going to be a government consideration. There's going to be requirements to do it, and you need the people to agree to let the government spend the money to do it, unless some local comes in and takes a lot of money. The best way probably that we can help communities, even in much smaller cases than I just talked about, is through education. If we have an educated community, they've got their eyes open, they're aware of what's going to occur, and what may happen. Don't treat them as stupid. Do the best we can to educate them, but also know we're not going to educate everybody. We're not going to convince everybody this is the way to go. We're going to get a spectrum of responses to any education we do. We have to go with that open mind of that and understand that we're going to have people say really good and really stupid. The best job we can do is to try and educate people, and that's governments, locals, neighbours, because neighbours are impacted by this as well, and do that way. So I think the best thing to do is through education, and communication goes with the education. How do you communicate to the people? It's a tricky task because nobody wants to lose what they value so much. I'll say, what's Camilo's response?
Thank you. I would like to complement with the idea of values. Because I think this is the situation where we have a place that we need to protect. And I really like, this approach that we are having today about the just transitions. So how to define what is just, this environmental justice or this coastal justice. What is really just? Normally, we are using just one value that is the economical value. So we say, if we have very expensive, like this castle, if we have a very expensive infrastructure, so we need to protect it. This is the example in Salguero Beach that I was just showing to all of you in Santa Marta in Colombia. Why we need to protect this piece of coast? Because nowadays we have a lot of buildings, tall buildings with very expensive apartments. So we need to protect this coast because we are protecting this infrastructure. But this is just one value. It's the economical value. But what happened with the social value, or what happened with the cultural value, or even what happened with natural value? So I am the opinion that there are some places that we just need to do nothing, just because there is it not worth the investment that we are using there. This is, why I wanted to include this slide about the seascape certification. That, and now I'm really, really sad about this beach that will be destroyed in Santa Marta, because it could be an amazing natural beach just in the middle of the city that could be certified, and the people all around the world will go there because they will be in a 100% natural beach that is just in the middle of a city. But in 5 years, this will be erosion, this will be, because will be urbanization, and we will start paying a lot of money to protect this beach that it will cost a lot less just to conserve the beach. So where to protect, I think it depends on the values. It will depend also, and the values depend also in the community that is there, because there are many different interests. What could be an engineer, so I always looking for solutions, at least some kind of solution is that, okay, maybe we can have some governance schemes, some kind of governance model that we can make decisions collaboratively and say, okay, if you want that this area is protected, you need to pay something. Maybe not all, but you need to pay something. So that you will think, deeper about to make that, because if you are investing your own money for this protection, maybe you will think a bit more about that if if the government that is paying for that. And at the same time, this is another example. Just here close to Santa Marta, there are a natural beach that was full of hostels, small hostels. Nowadays, they have erosion, and they are so worried, and they're asking the government to pay it for, groins and this coastal protection. And we are proposing to them, why not to recover the dunes? But who will pay for that? I always say to them, you should pay for that. You are who are taking money from the beach. So I think it's about values at the end.
Yeah, it's absolutely a challenging issue, and one where there's no easy answer, which is why I wanted to ask you this. So, we have quite a small group tonight, And I keep saying tonight it is midnight in the UK, and I think it's even later where Mofisur is. For some of you it will be the morning, for some of you it will be the afternoon. We have quite a small group today, and we had a thought to have breakout sessions, but we probably don't have enough people to break people out into groups. But I still think it would be useful if we can to use the time as we'd intended, which hear from all of you who are here today about maybe some issues of coastal protection that are going on in the places that you work with and that you're familiar with, or areas where you are where there maybe isn't any coastal protection, but where you think that some might be necessary. So I'm not quite sure what the best way is to do this, but perhaps I think if we just open the floor up, and if anyone here would like to just introduce themselves, and if you have any experience of your own of what coastal protection actions are happening where you are, or what you think could and should be protected, then we'd all be very grateful to hear from you. So perhaps just to kind of keep things ticking over, while I'll give you a few minutes to think about that, I can just share perhaps an example from maybe some of my own practice where I'm based. So I live in the west of Scotland, and near to where I live we've got a very small island, the island of Tiree, which has a population of about 600 people. It is extremely low-lying. Some of the climate projections are that the island will be cut in half if the worst cases of sea level rise materialise. It's not a landscape where extensive hard sea defences are appropriate. It's a site of special scientific interest, for example, so legally it would be difficult. There's a lot of opposition to it as well. And right now, there's a lot of discussions on the island about whether nature-based solutions could be used to slow down the effects of sea level rise and to protect against extremes. So some of the thought is about using, for example, marram grass, so some of the indigenous and native grasses, and considering whether they could be used to enhance sand dunes. But there are also concerns about tourists and tourism and the effect that has. Again, very similar actually to the case that Camilo shared. You have a lot of tourism which is bringing benefit economically to a few people, but is also contributing to enhancing as well some of the impacts and some of the damage. So the solution that's required, they're behavioural as well as nature-based. So this is something that's also quite challenging, and this is something that I'm working on at present. So I don't know if anybody else would like to follow up, or anybody else would like to share anything.
I'm Liana McManus, and I used to live in Southeast Asia in the Philippines. I think there's a layer that makes coastal protection more complex, and which is probably the more common situation, and that is coastal development, where you actually want to modify the coastal seascape for other uses. And in many countries in the Southeast Asian region, economics drive this coastal development. So it's not just a question of, do we protect the coastline and how? But when you modify it entirely, and that modifies the economic value of the space, then it naturally comes as well that the modes of protection may differ, maybe hybrid, maybe natural NBS or hard structures. But I think grappling with whether coastal development, in the sense that you want urbanization more than the rural setting, more manufacturing zone rather than just ecotourism. I think these are the hard choices that governments grapple with or local communities grapple with. So I just wanted to probably overlay this more complex problem within which we view coastal protection. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liana. So, as I say, we've got quite a small group this evening, and before we wrap, we can maybe wrap up in a few minutes. But I thought I might just ask another couple of questions to our two presenters, seeing as we have them, seeing as I have other things that are here that can be shared, and just to build on what Liana had said there, I'll ask you this first, Camilo, which is what do you think? So we saw a case in Cuba where we had what looked like a very successful example of coastal protection. What do you think the preconditions are that are needed to prioritise the social gains over the economic?
Okay, that's a very good question. But of course, a very difficult. I think the first thing is it needs that, I think Charles mentioned several times, it needs educated community, educated people. What's happening in Cuba is that because of their political model, almost everyone was to the university. Almost everyone, I remember that one of my closest friend, Alfredo, that he was, the responsible for Baladero Beach. This is why I really know this case study, because he was for 13 years the responsible for this beach, for the coastal management. He was able to have three cycles of the coastal management cycle, this classic cycle that we were studying, in the 90s and the 2000 about the coastal management. And they they have this advantage that I remember that they told me that in the time of Fidel Castro, he said to all the people, you need to go to the university. If you don't know what to study, you will study sociocultural studies. That is quite generalistic, but the idea that everyone will understand and have some analytical capacity. So I think this is one precondition that the people understand. Nowadays, this is a very particular case that we cannot replicate in other places, but what we can replicate nowadays, and this is why I also included, is this, I think, the citizen science. This is a very transformative tool because it's not that we educate the people by saying things, is that the people will discover by themselves. Nowadays, we have, the smartphones are smart when we use in a smart way. In other ways, not a smartphone, it's just a device. So this is a lot of power that we have to educate, the population. So this is first. Second, it's important to have this legislation that, give the opportunity to have these clear rules, and this possibility to have negotiation, that everyone feel that there is a fair space in which we, that we will be negotiating. It will be some time, negotiations are not quick, but at the end, the idea that we have some kind of agreement so that it will be possible to implement any kind of protection or any kind of plan. And finally, it will be important that the civil society is following all the actions and the monitoring. Because if we just make a coastal protection, structure, and we forget what's happening after that. And because I'm working more in beach management, I like to ask my colleagues, the coastal engineers, okay, after you have this very nice seawall, what's happening next? What's happening next? what will be there? Just these rocks, or will be some tourist attractions? Will be people going there? What will happen in 20 years? Who will be maintaining this structure? So we need that civil society is empowered enough to monitor what's happening with this coastal protection.
Tremendous, thank you. Charles, anything to add from your perspective as well about the preconditions for prioritising the social over the economic?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It is thinking about, I agree with what Camilo said as well. It's great to have plans. You need to follow them up. And you do need the champions. You need the people who want to see things happen. And the problem with the politics is they change so quickly. One election, one day, someone's in, someone's out. On the Gold Coast where I live, I came across a document from 2009 which said we don't want tall buildings on the Gold Coast. Not more than 9 stories, I think was the limit on the beachfront. We have a 74-story building on the beachfront. It's got a road in front of it, then the beach, but it's there. So these plans that get put in place, exactly what Camilo said, what next? You need to follow up on them. You need to stay informed and educated. And the community's got to stay informed and educated. So we all have a responsibility to consider what's going there and not just bury our heads in the sands, so to speak. And be thoughtful about what is next. And if we can manage to get politicians to put in legislation, and it's actually in the government face, and there's a mechanism to enforce it, that's another thing. We can have all the plans we like, unless there's an enforcement mechanism. I don't mean enforcement necessarily arrest people, but there's got to be a way of continuing it on than just say, here's the plan. And that takes political will and community will.
Great. Anya, you have your hand up. Anya.
Thanks all. I just wanted to share a publication that was recently published that looked at the different ownership structures of beaches across the different legal systems. And that is very interesting to see how the different legal systems are driving different structures of ownership, public versus private, and how that then leads to different outcomes in disputes. So there's a body of work for somebody interested working in that space to really follow that on. I put the link in the chat here. And I think, Camilla, would be interesting to hear from your perspective if you could see this happening in the case studies that you have worked with, if these different legal systems are driving different outcomes.
Yeah, totally. And I like that you mentioned, Annie, about the different legal system, because this is, something that really, really was difficult for me. I'm coming from a civil law environment. Now I'm living in a common law environment. So the difference that how to understand the regulation is like two different words. So I think this is also very crucial that we understand that, and I think that maybe I'm repetitive with that, but I think it's important to say that no solution is useful for everywhere, and every solution is useful a bit at least everywhere. Is that we can learn from any other case study, but we cannot apply any case study exactly, just that you go to Amazon and buy, your coastal protection solution and just stuff like plug and play. It is not working like that. And this legal system is something that is very important. I will also share here in the chat. We have a group not very active group, but we have a group in Telegram that is called Coastal Management and Law. So if someone is interested to continue, talking about coastal management and law, I will love, to have more conversation about that because it's something that is not really paying attention, unfortunately, from the coastal management community, at least in my opinion.
That would be fantastic, Camilla. I think there is great interest from colleagues here in Australia to collaborate in that space. So thank you.
I can see, Liana, that you're off mute. Were you about to come in?
No, I just wanted to say that I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion because I never knew coastal engineers knew so much. I I think the notion that in this particular case where coastal protection is the major issue, that governance can determine to a large extent the trajectory that the coast and the people living adjacent to it will be determined. And I think as an oceanographer, I am leaning towards, nature-based solution, but I never knew that there were so many nuances that needed to be taken into account, even as I had practiced with local communities while I was in Southeast Asia. So I think it is very enriching indeed, as how Camilo, Charles, and Anya both said, that we can learn from one another, but our creativity needs to continue beyond that because we have to face the situation on hand and probably be extremely creative with everyone, all the stakeholders involved in designing the fit for purpose solution. And I think that's the key messaging. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Liana. And indeed, Camilo, Charles, everybody, thank you for your contributions. I do have while you've been talking, I've been making some notes and I've pulled together a summary slide of some of the key implications for practice. Before I kind of go to our concluding slide though, I will just again give everybody who's listening in tonight, and don't feel you have to, but if you want to share any examples of what you are working on at the moment, if you have any questions for the panel of experts you have, I'll just give you a few moments now to formulate your thoughts. Please do share anything, type it in the chat if you don't feel able or willing to switch your mic on. But I'll just give you all a few minutes to think, is there anything you want to share, or the examples you want to share, anything you want?
Leslie froze.
Liana, do you want to chair the meeting further until Leslie?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, if we can send a message to Leslie as he is preparing to flash the summary slide. But yes, maybe ask everyone to provide your number one, your feedback, and number two, just situations that you have encountered in your practice that could probably benefit from all the ideas shared here about coastal protection. We would welcome that even post webinar. So Leslie, we lost you a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I assure you that was not intentional. My internet server usually does its upgrades in the middle of the night, and I went to just share my screen, I assure you that was not an intentional strategy, but
No
it
problem.
does give me a chance to just pull up my summary slides here, which I have prepared. Just have a few key points. So I know we've got a very geographically diverse audience in the room tonight. And here's just a few recommendations for practice that I've pulled together right now based on what we've heard. So for enabling a just transition in coastal protection, one of the first things I think we've heard from both Camilo and Charles, and also from the contributions around the room, is the importance of informing and engaging with communities early in a process. But also, as Charles was saying, recognising that communities can have challenging conversations on complicated issues if they're given the time and the space to do so. So that's a matter, I think, of kind of recognitional justice and also epistemic justice, which I work on, but recognising that coastal communities and stakeholders can understand very difficult issues about sea level rise, about erosion, about different protection options, if they're given the space and time to do so. That's the first thing then, about early and appropriate and realistic engagement. The second thing goes back to the little discussion that we had around engineering and different types of engineering expertise. So, unlike some of my social science colleagues, I do believe that the world is a real thing. It is a concrete, tangible thing that does behave in ways that are sometimes predictable, sometimes not. So engineering expertise is important. It's a really important part of coastal protection, but it is only one factor to consider alongside residents and stakeholders' perspectives. And I think Camilo's point about advocating for considering social and cultural values is a really good way of thinking about that. So when we're making decisions about how to protect the coast, doing that in a way that is a just transition, it does mean absolutely that engineering expertise is very important, but also social and cultural factors are crucial as well. A third thing to just reiterate, this came out in Charles' presentation, I think, before some of you had joined, so I'm just going to bring it back up, is that when we talk about nature-based solutions, these are not a single entity. So nature-based solutions are not all the same. We can have mangroves. Mangroves are very different from temperate coastal forests, which I work on a lot. These again are very different from the kind of dunes which Camilo shared with us. Again, these will be different from some of the coastal environments that Charles shared, and also, we can also have hybrid approaches as well. So nature-based solutions are not a single thing. Hard engineering is also not a single thing. There are seawalls, there's rock armouring, revetments. I've been learning all these terms in the last couple of weeks with my own research with colleagues in Indonesia, and I've been incredible. The range of stuff that's out there is quite incredible. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, or indeed coastal protection, remember these are not one single thing. Different species, different ecosystem types will offer different types of protection. So what is important for you all as practitioners and early mid-career researchers is consider what is important for your own context. Fifth is that sometimes not everything and everywhere can be protected. I threw this question out to both Charles and Camilo, and this came back. Not everything can always be protected, but what is crucial is the processes for making those decisions, and particularly I think for ensuring that some of the social and cultural values are considered within that. So what are the landscapes that matter to people? Are the things that we're protecting, are they simply things that are economically valuable? Are they simply where rich people live? Or are there fair processes for deciding what's protected and how, and also what happens to the places that are not protected and the people that live and work there? How are they compensated? How are they resettled? How are they recognised? Lastly, I would just say as well to avoid getting into what I would call false choice. I've said false choice solutions here, but I guess false choice dichotomies. So it's not an either or question of whether you either have hard engineering or whether you have nature-based approaches, whether you protect a place, whether you don't protect a place. These are not always simple either or decisions. It might be that within a quite geographically confined area, you might have some areas, some places where hard engineering is appropriate. Sometimes nature-based solutions are appropriate. Sometimes the hybrid approaches as well, which Charles shared the example from Vanuatu. Sometimes there are hybrid approaches that straddle the two. So don't feel you necessarily have to get locked into one or the other. So Mofizir made a really interesting point, I think, when he asked the question about dominant forms of knowledge paradigm. Don't feel you have to get locked into one or the other. As a coastal manager, as a practitioner, it might be that there is a time and place for both. So these are just a few things to consider, a few points for practice that I've extracted from the discussion. So we can wrap the session up there. I do note in the chat, Zia has asked everybody. There is a fantastic! Just before we wrap up, Raya has brought something in as well here about engineering carrying a stigma in the coastal conservation sphere, especially with recent scandals in the Philippines. And Raya says that perhaps the solution might be to include engineers in the conversation rather than driving them away, and green-grey engineering against solely nature-based solutions. That's a really great point, Raya. And that exactly, I think, speaks to that last point that I made there, that we shouldn't get sucked into these conflicts. It shouldn't be a war between hard engineers and ecological engineers, as much as some of my civil engineering colleagues might like to think that's the case. I think that's a really good point that speaks to that very well. Green-grey engineering, the hybrid approaches that Charles was sharing, that's a great point. And it does, as I was kind of trying to allude to with those points that I put up there, sometimes hard engineering approaches are appropriate. There are contexts where they are appropriate. And I mentioned, I said a little bit earlier about the island in Scotland, Tiree, where I work, and how there's a big aversion to hard engineering. Now some of the more forward-facing voices on the island are actually recognising, okay, we might need gabion baskets. We can't. Somebody actually said to me last week, we can't solve climate change with a drawing, and that was in relation to an art workshop we ran. But I took his point, which is that there are places where the engineering and the hard engineering approaches are appropriate, definitely. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Raya. Very timely to have that at the end of the session. So Zia has put a link in the chat to say to ensure that the series continues to evolve in response. So Raya, as you put your camera on, would you like to say anything you'd like to add, anything you'd like to share?
No, I'm pretty good, but yeah, I was saying actually with Dr. Liana that I'm pretty surprised how much engineers know, because in our context, the
Sorry.
Philippines, they're quite they don't have the best image, I'd say. I think that's where Dr. Liana was coming from. So it was really interesting. Although, I guess I'd like to ask also if I would want to get some studies into coastal engineering, because I'm a landscape architecture graduate, and I do feel that I do have a lack of like the mathematical and numerical modeling perspective for coastal conservation work. So if I'd like to get into coastal engineering studies to complement my degree, like where can I turn to, or is there something I can do self-paced or enroll in a master's program? So yeah. I think Mr.
Camila,
Camilo.
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I think that it's great that you are a landscape designer. That just to give you some experience, one of my best friends and colleague, she studied with me environmental engineer, and she did her PhD in Brazil in materials. And one of the topics that we wanted to research, unfortunately, we don't have time yet, but it will be nice that someone like you studies what are the right, materials
Materials.
and designs in the coast. That when we cannot build the same buildings, we cannot construct the same in a city that is just in the middle of the continent that we are building in front of the coast. One of the measures that Charles mentioned in his presentation, that it's also here in the Nova Scotia Coastal Protection Act, is about the setbacks. And I think setbacks is nice, that we have some room, but also we need to have the right constructions. So it's not just to have a space, to have some room. It's also that we need people like you, that give us some ideas that which will be the right materials that resist. I like to say to the people, because I work in beach management, that beach is one of the most adverse environments. You have salt, you have humidity, you have wind, and you have vandalism. So you have many, many restrictions, and we need to have the right materials and the right architecture. So I think your perspective and your profile is very, very welcome for the future of coastal protection.
Thank you. But if I still like to study though, so you would recommend I take an environmental engineering course over a solely coastal engineering course? Or
Oh, yeah, great.
okay.
I would say look around. Look
Mm,
around for a program that you like the interest in. Because there's different programs, different countries.
Hmm.
mhm.
So find one that appeals to you, would be my suggestion.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I will update you once I get into one. This will be a group project now. No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not mute yet. Thank you very much, Raya. Yeah, perhaps in maybe some of the follow-up materials that we send out as a sort of Just Transitions online training series team, we can perhaps think if each of us can maybe recommend one or two core texts or something, or things that you could follow up in if you're interested to know more about a coastal engineering perspective. Because yeah, like you, I know nothing about engineering. Well, I'm learning. Was in Indonesia twice last year, and I was looking at things. I was thinking, "Oh, that's really cool. That's an amazing seawall." And my engineering colleagues were like, "No, that's failing already." I was like, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, they said it's trapping sand. It's failing." And I said, "What do you mean it's failing? It's standing there." Yeah, so there's a real engineering knowledge, and it is really important. So yeah, all of which is a long and roundabout way of saying that as a team we can see if we can maybe recommend a small number of resources that between us that those who are keen to know more can follow up on. Great, and Prashanth has dropped something in as well. Prashanth, yeah, in many developing countries, the synergy between the civil engineer and the environmental engineer in the matter of seafront development is quite limited. Yeah, absolutely. Prashanth, is there anything more you would like to share on that? I think that absolutely is
Not coming in.
if you're there, Prashanth, you're very welcome to come in and share a bit more if you wish.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it is a great point nonetheless, absolutely, that the synergy between the civil engineer and the environmental engineer could be quite separate. And again, this goes back to what Moffizer had said right at the start of the session about these dominant ways of knowing that sometimes don't always meet with each other. And also, as Anya had said before, sometimes that can be a question of governance and just how you sometimes will have different government divisions or whatever, different sections that will be responsible for very different things, and they don't always necessarily meet or cross over. All right. So yeah, thank you very much everybody for coming along. Thank you for sticking with us, and thank you for your contributions. We really appreciate them. As I said before, Zia has put in the chat, I will copy it again, a link to feedback survey. If you could fill that in, that would really help us, because this is the first time we've run this series. We're developing it as we go along, and we want to kind of tweak it and refine it to make sure that these sessions are as impactful and meaningful as they can be. Our next session will be, the date hasn't been confirmed yet, it'll be in about maybe 6 weeks to 2 months' time, and that will be on deltas. So we'll be looking at just transitions in the context of deltas at the sort of river and coast interface. So we'll be putting a call out for expert contributors soon. If you know of anybody that wants to participate, if you want to stick your head up yourself, then you're very welcome to submit something to us. More information will be coming out soon from Shifang and the team. So, yeah, thank you all again for coming along. Thanks to all our contributors for your contributions, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's
Thank
been
you,
great.
Leslie, for the organization.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.